Hi everyone, welcome. Out here on my bench you can see an assortment of different fruits and veggies that I just removed from my freezer to give to a couple of my brand new worm bins. They're the newest systems here in my wormery, 2 weeks of age today, and they're the mixed red worms. And all my new stuff ends up on the shelf over there, gradually getting shifted left as they grow older. So right now, as I usually do, I've got my newest systems over here, but there's usually a tie between my newest systems and what's still remaining, the traces of their old environment, which is not yet a done deal as far as I'm concerned, because after we migrated the worms out of their finished vermicompost and hauled them out to start those 2 new systems over there, we made the assumption that there's probably still a bunch of worms living in the material that they used to occupy, and we set up this bait box. Now the bait box wasn't done in the video 2 weeks ago when we did the haul out and the launch of the new systems. I came back 3 days later, so even though the worms were hauled out and placed into those 2 new systems over there 14 days ago, this bait box has been in service here for only 11 days, and I've not even looked at this thing for the past 11 days. It's just been sitting here. So I'm curious to see how that's coming along. We're just going to assess the material. If it's still chock full of worms, we're going to throw a little more food in there, let it continue. Well, you know, we're going to let it continue either way, because my plan was not to bring an end to that today. I just wanted to check in on it, maybe throw a little extra food in there to help the process continue. And then at some point in the near future, perhaps during the next check-in and feeding of the 2 new systems, we'll just get the bait box out of there and do a little family reunion. Then I'll be able to consider this as a harvested batch of vermicompost. So I'm going to slip on a glove. We'll make our way over to the bench and we're going to get started. So we'll start here in the bait box, and there were some interesting objects in the old system that the worms used to occupy. Some of these slow composting objects, such as pumpkin stems and the seed from a mango, and there's even this piece of cardboard which had served as our little dividing partition, which I usually use to segment the horizontal migration feeding zone, keep it separate from the finished castings, the idea being that we don't want to contaminate the finished castings with any of the materials being used to lure the worms out of their material over into the collection area. So I guess I was just curious. A lot of times I won't even look to see what's going on in one of these bait boxes. We'll just sometimes check the material underneath it, see if it looks like we've still got some depopulation pending, and perhaps add a little bit of extra food to make sure the process is able to continue smoothly. So why don't we just get ahead or move on ahead to getting this taken care of. I've got some chunks of lettuce here, and what is this? Little pieces of peach. And what's that? Tomato? It's hard to tell. I don't think we need a whole lot in here. This little bait box probably isn't going to need to go a whole lot longer. And as far as moisture goes, I think we're in good shape down here. I think we're just going to leave it the way it is. All those materials we just dropped in there, I believe, are going to also bring with them a little bit of additional moisture. And then at some point, these little wormies will get reunited with the rest of the family over in the 2 new systems. I'm not sure how this was. I think perhaps I'm getting the order of things mixed up here. We had some sort of top covering paper on here earlier. We don't seem to have that anymore since I blended it all in. But you know, let's just extract our bait box here briefly and give a peek at the material that the worms used to occupy. I guess this is my chance really quickly to remove any wormies that I spot. One stuck out clearly on the surface. I thought I saw a second one, but I guess the bright lights scared the little guy away and they went down into the material. And you know, besides inspecting the material and looking for wormies, now my intention is not to haul every last worm that I encounter out of here. That would be a little bit impractical and sort of defeat the purpose of having a bait box to do the job of gathering them up. But I do like the idea of taking all this material out here on the surface that's been exposed to the air over the past 11 days and drying a little bit, and blending it in with the material at large so that all the material in the system has its moisture content sort of equalized and dispersed. This way anything that's still remaining a little bit damp down low will be brought up to the surface, giving it an opportunity to shed a little bit more of its moisture to evaporation. The other thing that's going to help with the drying here is the submersion of the dry stuff that's been out on the surface here into the rest of the material, further drying everything. And here and there I'm bumping into a worm, but I've told myself here that I've got to stop pulling worms out individually. All we're really doing here is spot checking the system to see how things look. And I think we're just going to let the process continue, but I don't think it's going to require a whole lot more because the material does feel like it's getting quite dry, meaning that the worms are not going to want to remain in this stuff. They're going to be looking for something better. And we'll just pull this last little guy out for the heck of it, right? They're going to want to get somewhere better. These composting worms are surface feeders in general, looking for stuff that's fallen to the ground, is in the process of decomposition, so having the bait box out on the surface is sort of the ideal spot for it to be, because worms will eventually stumble on it. And now that we've blended in all the dry material down into the vermicompost, I have a feeling that we've just changed what might have been still semi-comfortable for the worms to be in into something that the worms are probably much less content to remain in. Ideally, sending them to the surface in search of something a little bit more cozy. But if you ask me, the system's going to be ready to bring to an end next time we check in, and I think we'll be ready for our family reunion. So let's move on to feeding the main bins. So we'll bring them out here next. What I've got in this little jar here, this little spice jar and dispenser, is some Mosquito Dunks that I've placed into my grinder to make almost like a powder out of it. And I'm going to apply a little bit of this stuff because I did notice a couple flying insects. Nothing too crazy going on here, luckily. But I do want to apply a little bit of this stuff because as we till around and explore and take care of feeding these little guys, this stuff will get blended in, and this stuff works really well on controlling populations of flying insects. So I like the way both systems have a whole lot of freshly deposited castings out here on the top surface, and those top covering pieces of paper that were out here, those bags that used to have sugar in them, are a little departure from what I usually use as top coverings, especially in my newest systems. My newest systems usually have plastic covers to maximize the retention of moisture in the systems. But since we're in the middle of summer right now and it's been super humid lately, things don't dry out the way they do in the winter time when the furnace is running and the climate control is blowing air throughout the house. It's true that I'm in my basement, so there's no climate control going on down here really, but it does end up becoming quite dry down here in my basement, just like in the rest of the house in the winter time. But in the summertime, I only run air conditioning when I really feel like I need it. Like today, I think they're talking about record high temperatures, so chances are the air conditioning will be turned on shortly. Right now it's still early in the morning, and I'm still able to deal with the somewhat warm temperatures. Later on, when it gets really hot and steamy, I'll be looking for a little bit of relief in the form of air conditioning. So the corn cobs that we included as part of their welcome feeding, the food that was placed in here even prior to the worms being dropped in here, is holding out, which is certainly not a surprise. But the watermelon rinds and the coffee that we gave them is probably long gone now after 14 days. And I think that they're probably due for their next feeding. So I've created a nice little trench down the middle into which today's feeding can go. So let's proceed to doing that. There's certainly nothing out of the ordinary about these systems, so I just wanted to make it a fairly routine, simple check-in. So we'll start out by repurposing what had been out on the top surface, marking where we feed. These things that I refer to as my feeding zone indicators are going to get replaced, since you might have noticed earlier when I showed the foods that they're getting. Besides the fruit and veggie combo out of the freezer, there's also a couple days worth of coffee over there. And that means we've got a couple nice new replacement feeding zone indicators to deploy when we're finished feeding. So let's start out by dropping in the food portion of coffee first, setting aside what's going to become our feeding zone indicator. And before I forget, I'm going to also include a little bit of pulverized eggshell as grit, because even though it's not an absolutely necessary step to include grit in every feeding of the worm bins, it's usually a pretty good practice to do so. And I've seen instances on other worm farming channels where people go to the extra trouble of making sure that absolutely no grit is placed into the systems as an experiment to see how the worms perform without any grit. And it does seem to me like it's just fine if there isn't any, because the worms manage fine without it. But you know, around here there's always like eggshells piling up, and what better way to get rid of them than to give them to the worms and let the worms make good use of it as grit. And you know, when it comes to these corn cobs, I've had various little corn cob spheres, corn cob bits that were tracked from day one to see how long they last, and at this point they're still going after more than a year. These corn cobs, as soon as they get soft enough that I can start helping along the breakdown process, my intention with these was to do just that. And it's pretty cool to see how the worms really like to get into brand new corn cobs to take advantage of the soft inside of the cob, because they'll nibble that clean, and that'll be the first portion of the corn cob that they eat. And eventually it all goes, but you know, certain substances are just a little bit tougher than others, and those things take a little bit more time to break down in the worm bin. And my intention with these corn cobs is to make them go as quickly as possible versus allowing the natural process to break it down without any help, and see what we could do about making those things vanish fast rather than keeping them around forever. So that's our check-in here. I do believe that the finished vermicompost that these little guys left behind in their old system is going to be depopulated very soon, just based on the way it felt when we were rummaging through there earlier. Definitely feeling pretty dry, and you could see that there were very few worms remaining in the stuff. We even helped a few of them into the bait box, kind of ushering them out of the material that we'd like to see depopulated. And I do believe that the remainder of any worms that might still be hanging out in that stuff will be exiting soon, now that we've caused the stuff to be significantly drier by blending in all the material that had been out on the surface. So that's probably what the next check-in is going to look like here. And I guess it'll be interesting to see what I come up with as far as a novelty. You know, it's like so routine sometimes when your worm bins have nothing that sets them apart, or nothing to distinguish them, or to, is that the right word I'm looking for? What's the right word? To differentiate them, or, you know, to set them apart from all the rest. Because the really cool thing about these mixed red worms and what they were doing in their old home, you know, that bin that we checked in on in the beginning, their old home was a system that had been built out of twine, and the worms, over the course of the lifespan of that system, turned all the twine that had been the bedding into that lovely vermicompost that you saw. So that was interesting from that point of view. Here, so far, no novelty, nothing to set the systems apart from everything else that's going on, but I'll be thinking about it, and I'll probably come up with something soon. Any input or ideas on that would be welcome, so please comment. Let me know what you think. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in on the 2-week-old mixed red worms, as well as the baiting progress in their old vermicompost. Hopefully finishing soon. Hopefully we could bring that to an end soon and do the family reunion. I could harvest those castings, and then these systems will be off and running. And these are always fun worms to check in on. So we'll see you next time. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.